tere! Tänane saade on inglise keeles, nii et ma lähen kohe siis inglise keelele üle. Hello! Very nice to see you and thank you Liina from Sweden and Liina from Estonia joining me here today on Nestingcast. The topic we are talking today is the forest situation in Sweden, and Lina Burnelius will open that subject. But before I ask you, Liina, from Estonia, about your different experiences in Sweden with forests.
Well, my experiences in Sweden are actually quite limited, but I remember the first time very well. It was in 1993. I was a teenager. It was my first trip to Sweden. And then I saw like really big clear cuts on hillsides. And I had never seen something like that in Estonia, although I grew up in the countryside most of the time, and my father even worked in forestry sector. But the clear cuts here were rather small, and of course we don't have hills in Estonia. So when we drove around there in Sweden, then not only me but other Estonians, we were quite staring at these big clear cuts, and our Swedish friends noticed that, and they told us that yeah, that's a really bad thing. What was done there, especially on the hillside with all the erosion and stuff, and that we have learned from these bad experiences, and it's not done anymore. So, and I lived with that knowledge that some mistakes were made in Swedish forestry, but that they understood that it's not the best way forward, and they're not doing this anymore. So I lived with this knowledge for quite a long time, actually very, very long time, like even decades. And then at some point when I became critical about forestry in Estonia, and then when I understood that a lot of people working in Estonian forestry have taken Sweden as example, then and only then did I look more carefully into what's happening in Sweden, and I understood that yeah, perhaps it's not so rosy as I was explained in 1990s.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Liina, now from Sweden. When we speak about the Swedish forestry model at present, what does it mean in a bit more detail?
I would describe it as something as the opposite that is needed to be done. Given the environmental and climate crisis that we're in, I would first just like to say this, moving forward in talking about carbon depth and carbon storages, of course, the first step is to keep all the fossils in the ground. But there are more carbon than just the fossil kind that needs to stay in the ground. Also, carbon stored in forests needs to stay in the forest if we were to tackle the climate crisis. So if we were to simplify it a little bit, then when it comes to fossils, it's just a question of when. We need to urgently phase out fossils. But when it comes to land use, it's more difficult. We need to engage in this conversation on how to use land, both for crops for eat and to produce fibers. And how should one carry out forestry? If we were to meet the Paris Agreement, if we were to respect, for example, Europe's biodiversity strategy and the sustainability goals set out by the UN, it's quite clear. You can follow 3 simple rules. You have to ask yourself, could I log this forest? If I log this forest, how should I carry out the forestry? What method should I use? When I take out biomass from the ecosystem, what should I produce? Swedish forestry model, they are doing everything wrong. On a daily basis, we're expanding to the last remaining natural forest we have left that we need to protect in order to meet both environmental goals and the Paris Agreement. Also forest that needs to be saved if we were to respect indigenous people's rights. forest that needs to be saved if we were to have clean air, fresh water, mushrooms, and recreations. When we carry out forestry, we always, or at least 99 out of 100 examples, we carry out forestry in the most environmental harmful way, like this one. This is standard. And because they have saved 14 trees per hectare, they're no longer called clear cuts. They called it something else, but sometimes you just need to call it what it is. This is still a clear cut, and it's FSC certified. So this is what you get when you buy certified wood from Sweden. This is the sustainable forestry model. And then the last rule, what do we produce? We need to lower our emissions drastically. Despite that fact, 80% of all the biomass taken out of the Swedish forest ecosystem is turned into climate harmful products, such as bioenergy, biofuels, single-use products, takeaway cups, e-commerce packaging, and only a fraction of the biomass taken out via this method is turned into long-lived products and parts of housing and furniture and stuff like that. So in detail, I would say the Swedish forestry model is doing 3 wrong out of 3 possible. This is harmful for biodiversity, harmful for climate, harmful for indigenous people, harmful for the next generation, harmful for any other businesses that would like to depend on forests, because you can use the forest like this one. This has been, are still under stewardship for indigenous societies, and they have been using this forest without harming the ecosystem. And if I move out of the picture, you will see this clear line. This is not 2 pictures put together. This is just where we managed to stop them. So you see, it's clear that you can carry out forestry and use the ecosystem, be part of the ecosystem without totally wiping it away, like the Swedish forestry model does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, Liina from Estonia. Can you describe how this model is now used in Estonia? What do you see?
Well, I can see that we have copied it quite diligently because the statistics we just published also on the Facebook page of our NGO, well, these statistics are from 2017. They also show that 80% of our wood goes to like producing energy, like heating, also paper, and then only 9% for construction and 1% for furniture. So we have basically the same. So the percentages are quite similar, and it is believed that right now the percentage of like energy wood, let's say directly pellets, is even higher probably than 80%, because there has been some growth in that sector since 2017. So we have quite, I would say, nicely copied the Swedish model. And then the really annoying thing is that when you criticize this over logging, what we have been doing quite actively in Estonia, then the opposite side, like people working in forestry, they always comment that, you know, everybody wants to sit on a chair, everybody would like to have a table. You also live in a wooden house. So these are the arguments they often bring. But then we look at the percentages and we see that only 1% is furniture. And a lot of the like really good furniture made in Estonia is made of wood which has been logged elsewhere, because it's already hard to get high quality wood for furniture from Estonian forests. So the companies, they import quite a lot already. And in construction, it is less. There are less imports in construction, but quite a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. Liina, yes?
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Lina just said, because I also find it super important to underline that if we were to carry out forestry sustainable, we need not only to follow these 3 rules, we also need to follow them in that order to make it super, super clear. A certified wood product from Sweden today is not climate friendly nor environmental friendly, because we have not first protected enough forest. So if we follow the 3 rules again, we need to first protect minimum 30% of the land. We then need to change to close to nature forestry. And then we need to take out biomass and turn it into long-lived products. As long as you continue to only protect around 6% of the land, always carrying out clear cuts, then the long-lived products is just one thing that is done right, but it's coming from a unsustainable system, so the end product is not sustainable at all. But the industry have learned this language. They have learned that, but don't you want to have a wood house instead of a concrete house? Of course we want that. But until you've done everything right, we are not satisfied with you just continue business as usual and are better than concrete. That is not enough. That is like being better than oil. It's not hard to be better than oil. We need you to step up your game and actually carry out this in a sustainable way, because that's the beauty in forestry. The same if you are in the business of creating medicine or food. It's not something that we should stop doing. We could do this forever if we learn to do it right. We can create more jobs, bigger networks of protected forest land, more recreation spots, and better resilience and buffered zones, and an ally in the changing climate. All this is possible if we were to start protecting and restoring land. And instead, they just continue down business as usual, learn this beautiful language of this is fossil free, this is net zero, this is climate neutral, and this is better than concrete. All of that is just greenwashing, because what they really do, they are wiping away ecosystems that have stored carbon since the Ice Age. They form a bedrock of life for thousands of years. And in addition, when you carry out this type of loggings, when you are in the boreal region and in the northern part of the world, you're also damaging the ground. And we have to talk about the ground. You should keep fossils in the ground. You should protect all carbon storages in the ground. And boreal forests, they store the majority of its carbon in the ground. So this is like stabbing our home. And from the ground, it's just equals enormous amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And afterwards, they plant trees. But maybe we should go back into monocultures later in the conversation, because that's the next step they do wrong. But
yes. Thank you. Yeah. About that, I wanted to ask you, Liina, now from Estonia. Do you see in Estonia also this kind of greenwash, basically?
Yeah, it is quite widespread, not only in the industry, but also in politics, who have somehow listened more to the industry than to the science. So in some cases, we love to listen to the science, for example, during certain medical crises, which we all know very well. Then scientists give counsel to our politicians constantly, and they do listen. But for example, in forestry, they somehow, well, many of them, not all of them, but many of them seem to think that whatever the industry says, that is true. That is something we should believe. And we have encountered some very weird sort of perceptions of forest, and especially the soil. Now, when you, Liina, spoke about the soil, I remember how, I will put it very vaguely, how some people giving counsel to certain politicians in Estonia did not understand at all that some of the carbon, or quite a lot of the carbon, is stored in the soil. When we had a certain meeting last year, then we were told that when a tree becomes so old or so sick that it falls over, then it immediately emits all CO2 into the air. That it all goes like poof into the air, like air from a balloon. And so we're quite surprised. Yeah. We are not scientists. We are activists, like really grassroots level activists. But well, and we were then trying to explain our point of view, or sort of the scientific point of view, and it was really surprising that such kind of like basic knowledge is not existent there where politicians are asking for counsel. So that was really surprising that this greenwashing and fake information has already gone so far. And of course, when you have repeated the speaking points of the intensive industry for years, then I suppose that for some people it's already pretty hard then to say that, okay, yes, I was wrong. We have a few politicians who have done that, who have publicly admitted that some years ago, when certain laws were passed in our parliament, etc., that they were not right, or that they didn't investigate the matter deeply enough, that they passed the laws on not correct knowledge, etc. Some people already do that, and I would say that these are strong people, because you have to be strong to admit your own mistakes. And these also intelligent people. But many continue business as usual, and even if they understand that it's actually greenwashing, they just try to save their face, I would say.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I just desperately hope for a few more brave politicians that would just make the difference, because we are in the middle of a crisis. That doesn't mean that we have all the answers. We don't have all the solutions, but we have good knowledge of a few do's and don'ts. We have a few things that we need to stop doing, and we have a few things that we need to urgently start doing. And that means that a few people in the powerful elite have to just say similar to what you just said, Lina. We were wrong. We've learned from our mistakes. This is a matter of life. We will now do better. And we are in urgent, desperate need for this. Honest politicians and also honest statistics. Like that is also something that is important to mention when it comes to land use. A lot of these emissions doesn't count. We move them around, we call them different things, we move them between LULUCF and Renewable Energy Directive, but at the end of the day, what the atmosphere is seeing is just an enormous amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And you can't offset your way out of a climate crisis when we have a carbon budget that is running out within 7 years. So what we do the coming decades, that is what counts. And it's sad, but hopeful at the same time. The lack of awareness and knowledge, that is where I put my hope. Because I think if just a few more people realize the gap between the words and the actions at the moment, if we were just to change a little bit, we will save many lives. Not only species in the forest, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about human lives. Because if we were to start protecting and restoring land, we will not only emit less CO2, we will also start to really take out already emitted CO2 from the atmosphere. That is why protection and restoring of forest is such a key tool in one of these start doing points. One of the things that we need to urgently start doing. Respect forest protections for its win-win-win. Restoring ecosystem, our best ally in the climate crisis. Emit less CO2, less of this, and taking out CO2, like this forest is doing already from the atmosphere.
Yes. This sounds really strong, that we need these people who would admit that if they didn't know, now they know. And even this takes courage, I think, to see that maybe I might have been wrong. Maybe what I have said wasn't right. And even if you are not courageous enough to say it out loud, just say it to yourself and change what you do. But now about let's say this clear cut. One way of greenwash is that, yes, we took that forest down, but now we have planted tons of trees. Maybe Lina from Sweden, let's take that topic.
Yeah, and you said it right. But the industry, they use other languages. They say that we log forest and then we replant forest.
Yes.
But you cannot plant a forest. You can only plant trees. And if you plant trees, you plant a monoculture. And this is a global problem, that we systematically lose ecosystem in favor for climate damaging monocultures. But in Sweden, we are doing this in a record-breaking rate. Already now, over 64% of all our forests are trees younger than 62. So a majority are just teeny tiny young teenagers, babies in the ecosystem. If a pine were to live its natural whole life in the forest, this life cycle takes 1,000 years. And if then all our forest, or a majority of our forest, actually constitutes of monocultures of young teenager trees younger than 60 years, you realize that we have lost a lot of healthy old ecosystems in favor for all these young monocultures. And what the industry say is that these monocultures, they are fast growing and of an enormous and an important carbon sink. But that is a lie. Because when you clear cut the ecosystem, you're wiping away the whole ecosystem, and it looks like this. For the first 20 years, they are an emitter. CO2 and methane and other greenhouse gases are emitted from this logging site. Then you plant a monoculture, and for a brief moment of time during maybe 20 years, between 20 and 40, they are actually a fast growing sink. But the amount of CO2 and methane that was leaked and are leaking from the clear cut means that despite that they are young and fast growing, it takes approximately 60 years, 6 decades, for this monoculture that is about to grow here to be carbon neutral. And we don't have 60 years to pay back from a carbon debt that this clear cut entail. And we don't need more monocultures. Monocultures is harmful for biodiversity, and it cannot give us food or lichen for reindeer husbandry. And the most important thing to keep in mind, no logging company has ever planted a monoculture in order to make up for the loss of forest. It has only been planted in order to be logged again. So after 80 years, about that time when it's finally carbon neutral, whilst at the same time unbelievably bad for the environment, and carbon neutral 50 years too late in order to honor the Paris Agreement, they will log it again. And everything they take out, you can simplify into 20% being furniture and 80% to be burned. this regardless if they plant twice as many trees as the natural forest entails. There's nothing green or climate friendly in this way of carry out forestry, regardless if the trees are growing really, really, really fast.
Liina from Estonia now. Is this something also very much happening here in Estonia?
Yeah, well, same language is used, and not very many people understand this carbon gap or carbon debt. So quite many people, also among them politicians, are still fooled by the story that new trees will be planted. It seems to be like a silver bullet miracle solution for everything. And scientists have explained the same system what was explained by Liina now, that it takes decades, that we don't have this time, that when you burn a tree, then this is the case when everything is emitted right into the atmosphere, all the CO2. So that we can be sure about. And 1 unit of wood emits more CO2 than fossil fuels, as is also proven by scientists. So yeah, there is this knowledge gap and carbon gap at the same time. And I remember very well how we were trying to explain that to a political counselor last year, again explaining that it takes decades until CO2 is stored again, there is the gap, and that it shouldn't be considered carbon neutral. And then we were told that yeah, it's all very nice, I understand that, but you should explain that in Brussels, because in the EU directives it is written that it is carbon neutral. You should contact the European Commission in that matter. We were told that, we, like grassroots level NGO, and when the NGOs are now trying to do precisely that, and I was thinking about the new EU forest strategy, and also the revised renewable energy directive. Then, but what are the member states doing? And also Estonia and Sweden, they are doing the opposite. So we were told to explain in Brussels about the fact that burning wood is actually not CO2 neutral, but a certain letter which was sent to the European Commission and signed by the ministers from both Estonia and Sweden, also Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Germany, Austria, if I remember correctly, and then some other countries as well. So they were explaining that our countries would like to continue business as usual. So it is very, very contradictory what kind of conflicting messages we are getting.
Yeah, and not only are we asked to bring this message forward, I represent Sweden in this conversation, and what I'm about to say now also is relevant from regarding Finland. But the Prime Minister in Sweden and the Prime Minister in Finland were actually reaching out to the EU when some of the draft actually looked from a climate environmental perspective like good. We were finally taking steps in the right direction, going back to this knowledge of stuff we need to start implementing and stuff we need to stop doing. Then we were, for example, we saw this draft of the EU strategy saying that we need to stop clear cutting and we need to shift to close to nature forestry. Then the Prime Minister from the Sweden and Finland reached out to the EU and asked them specifically to delete the line of close to nature forestry, which is shocking and devastating and quite hard to grasp, hurtful actually, which means that it's definitely, then there's an example of when it's not a knowledge gap. They're actually a term for something that we could actually start doing. And clearcutting versus close to nature forestry, I think the word speaks for itself. It's and politically we don't seem to be ready to do this. And I think it goes back to something that we touched upon before. We are either ready to break up with coal, or we will continue down not only business as usual, but out of the frying pan into the fire. Because fossils have put us in the situation we're in now. It's bad as it is. If we were to go to continue extract carbon and continue to burn the same level as we did before, but not with fossils, we will actually increase the CO2 emissions. So fossils is bad as it is. We're about, if we don't stop this madness, we will think will get worse. If we go from coal to biomass in your plant, then you will emit more CO2. If you do fuels out of pine trees instead of fossil oil, you will not only emit more CO2, you will also lose the ecosystem. So we have a important conversation ahead of us, especially due to the fact that the Renewable Energy Directive did not change. We will, like on the European level, forest biomass is still considered renewable. And as I said before, this is important to underline, forests are not renewable. It's an ecosystem, one that can be restored, protected, but not replanted. We can only plant trees, and we do not need more burning and more monoculture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Every that is subsidizing biodiversity is money towards really renewable energy. So this is true.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Liina, do you want to add something? Or I have some other questions now in mind, but I ask first you.
No.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I had some internet problems, so I didn't see you for a second, but now I think it's okay again. Liina from Sweden, and also Liina from Estonia. I'm interested to ask you about inventory systems and statistics. You said, I think, Liina, that it is important to get right statistics, and here in Estonia we have problems with statistics. Basically, scientists can't get them really. How it is in Sweden, and the system here I think is somehow copied from Sweden. So how is it there? How did it come, or how is it working at the moment?
Oh, it doesn't work at all. We cheat like systematically. In Sweden, the Swedish government and we only report on 1/3 of our emissions. So everywhere you can cheat, we cheat. So definitely not learn from Sweden. We aim for net zero 2 decades too late. And yeah, I guess that is the short answer. We don't count from land use. We don't count for biomass burning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Liina, how it is in Estonia? Like, what's happening?
I think in Estonia, when we speak about statistics and forestry, then at the moment we are concerned about the forest inventory data. So we are not sure that we know how much forest we have or how many trees we have, because in Estonia we have an environmental agency, and they are basically the only ones who know where are the points located all over Estonia where they measure the forest cover. So even the scientists who have a PhD in ecology, they don't have access to this basic data, to these points where the forest is measured. And so we have gone to court to get access to that data for scientists, not for ourselves. And so we're trying to figure out how the situation is, because now when different data is compared by scientists and also by journalists, there are big discrepancies. And so we're not sure. We can't say that surely somebody is cheating or there is some manipulation. We don't know, but it just looks really suspicious. Like why do not even scientists get access? And our Ministry of Environment proposed a law to make forest inventory data like secret. So it will be discussed in autumn in our parliament. When our parliament comes back from the recess, they will continue these discussions, which they started already at the beginning of the summer. And so that's how the situation is. So do you have something similar in Sweden, with forest inventory data, not the carbon, not the CO2 data?
Yeah, we have similar. Maybe I misunderstood your question. When like in statistics, I thought you meant statistics over emissions. But then we also have data gathering over inventorying and stuff like that. We have had several, I would say, setbacks, and I dare to say corruption actually, more over just inventorying. One thing that is often mapped in inventory back in the day, and just if you're going back a few years, is the so-called woodland key habitats, like this last core of the really, really precious woodland key habitats, like key habitats in the forest. Mm-hmm. Yeah, key for biodiversity, key for carbon storage, key for life on Earth. And we actually have different authorities relevant when it comes to the forest industry. We have the EPA, similar to you in Estonia, but we also have the forestry board, and we have the county boards. And these three authorities, they have different mandates. It could be tricky somehow, and sometimes to hold the right authority responsible to move the things forward. But the authority that is given permission and oversees logging sites is the forestry board. But the head of the forestry board, the Swedish government-owned authority that are responsible for the inventory of these key areas, the woodland key habitats, they realized that if we were to inventory the last remaining forest that we have left in Sweden, to a lot extent, this is just all growth forest left. It's either plantation and this really, really precious forest. And we will, if we continue this inventory, we will actually put on paper that they are woodland key habitats. And when it's a woodland key habitat, you cannot log them. So the solution from the Swedish authorities were not to step up the inventory in order to put on paper how valuable these forests are so that we can actually prevent them from logging. No, they decided to do the opposite. We're gonna stop inventory, because if we don't inventory, if the Swedish authorities don't inventory it, we don't know the value. So we wouldn't have done anything wrong if we just continue expanding.
Mm-hmm.
So what's not on paper, it's up for grabs.
I think we have exactly the same in Estonia, but a little bit differently. But we have also these habitats. We call them like valuable habitats, and not all of them have been taken a stock of. So the scientists and experts are telling that we know the location of approximately 50% of these habitats. And there has been a clear reluctance from state, like the Minister of Environment and different agencies belonging to the Ministry of Environment. And there has been this reluctance really to go and look for all the rest. And we're not talking about like huge areas. These are really quite small in Estonia, sometimes even less than a hectare, but they are scattered all around the forest. So in all counties, everywhere. And these would be like little reserves where species can survive when everything around them is logged or forest is young. Um, and it has been like an issue for decades that why don't we do a full inventory so that the whole country would be covered? And sometimes they say that they don't have enough money. Then sometimes they say that they don't have enough personnel to do that. And when NGOs get funding from abroad to do that, then these NGOs are accused of being sort of foreign agents, etc. So finding and taking stock of these valuable habitats is surely an issue in Estonia as well. And I can see that it is also probably something we have copied from Sweden, that just buy time, don't rush, just don't go and look for them, because if you don't know where they are, what they are, how many of them are, then you can nicely log them in between until the NGOs somehow find the money, or until you're really, really forced to do that by some pressure.
Yeah, and it's just this race on time. It's striking like how similar our situation are. You and I already know this, Lina, because we speak quite often. But now for the audience to know, like this is just widespread across Europe and the world, and this systematically fragmentation. They use word mosaic type of logging, and it looks like this chessboard more or less. So the clear cuts look smaller because they are smaller per hectare, but if you look at the whole chessboard, you see it's the same amount. And this fragmentation spots that actually creates even more damage from time to time, because if you look at the chessboard as an example, I would describe the white parts as the clear cuts and the black parts as still like precious forest. But if you are a black square surrounded by 4 white ones, the buffered zone for like dealing with the surrounding clear cuts makes the actual part that is still forest within this black square is smaller, because you lose so much around the buffer zones. Make sense? And this is also systematically done, because then the value goes down within the black parts, and then they go in and selective log. Then they brag about, but we're not always carrying out clear cuts. And then they go into the black parts and they selective log like in a backwards way. They take out everything with good biological value, deciduous trees and stuff like that, call it residues and burn it. But then the value of this part has been so low that when we are actually there inventorying it again, it's been a few years and we cannot save it because it's not like super precious. So that's why inventorying this valuable habitats, it could be core value habitats, it could be woodland key habitats, call it different thing across Europe, but the biological values of these last cores, this small islands of real forests trying to survive in this oceans of clear cuts and monocultures, these needs to be preserved, because these are the cores that we will restore and start creating the landscape of protection, because the landscapes are protecting well connected to one another. That is what biodiversity needs, that is what indigenous societies need, and that is what we need in order to tackle the climate crisis. Because keep in mind, we have to express to them, but that's not all. We don't want to save all the forest. It's just a few cores. Please preserve the last real ones. That is absurd to me, because the goal we already always are achieving and trying to achieve, sorry for my English, the goal that we're always trying to achieve is going back to the first rule: meet the European biodiversity strategy. We should not stop forestry. We should just protect 30% of the land. That means that there's a lot of land to be logged.
Yes, about that, how is it, let's say, politically a little bit more, if I may ask? You already said that there is desperate need of some politicians who really bravely say out or stand out, but what could be done to make this political wish grow? Is there something?
Would you like to start, Lina, or should I start?
Well, you could start perhaps, and perhaps also in the same question mention how the general public in Sweden perceives that, if there is like pressure to politicians and all that.
Yeah, I would say the pressure is really growing, not only from grassroots movement, because now, like, since I would say the shift started about 6 months ago. So since then, it's always like, I would say the number or like the level of pressure is higher since the last 6 months. But for the last decades, every time you made an opinion poll, people want to preserve forests in Sweden. Not only do they want forests close to them and close to cities to be preserved, they like the idea and I find it important for them to know that also forests far, far away from me to visit, it's important for me that they are still there. There's a big gap between the society's wish and the policy in place. Big gap. And then the Sweden's largest newspaper started around 6 months ago this in-depth series on forestry. Now they are following up on this, like I mentioned before, how Sweden actually cheat when it comes to doing their part in to meet the Paris Agreement. Not account or not even including all this emissions in its statistics or in its policy. You can never fix something if you cheat already when you start doing the data, right? And these things overlap: bioenergy, land use, and the statistics of emissions. The fact that Sweden are not aiming to become greenhouse gas free, we are only aiming to become fossil free. So we have a policy that actually aims to go from fossil carbon to biomass carbon. Insane. But that is actually what we're aiming for. And in the meantime, the public is waking up. We know that if we were to protect all forests that is left in Sweden, if it's not just a monoculture, the last remaining real forests, if we were to protect them, we will not meet our own environmental goals. We don't have forests left to do that. We need to restore in order to meet them. And instead of stopping the expansion, starting the restoring, we are increasing the logging rate. And we are also, from year to year, protecting a little bit more. But this has already been outlined. If we continue logging in the same rate and protecting in the same rate, all of our forests outside protected areas, which is in the productive forest land, less than 4%, all our forests will be gone within 9 years. So we can talk about policy, we can call ourselves green, we can point into areas that are protected, a new record-breaking big national park. If we continue down the same road, all our real forests without outside of national parks will be gone in less than a decade. So again, I said it in the beginning of this conversation, this is the decade that counts. This is now when politicians need to dare to say, we cannot switch from one disastrous, climate damaging fuel to another. We can't shift from fossils to continue to take out this amount of biomass from our ecosystem. We need this ecosystem for a lot of other things. We don't need this amount of fuel. And the public wants us to do this. We have this political space now. So I just hope for one of them to do it.
Liina, do you want to add?
Well, in Estonia, we have also witnessed that already for more than a year, media is also more active on forestry issues, and we have dozens of NGOs, although we are quite a small country, but wherever the State Forest Management Center tries to get rid of a forest which is important for the local community, then people start an NGO. So people are very active, especially on local level. Media is more and more involved, and we are already seeing some shifts in our politics. Some parties, some politicians have finally understood what it's all about. But we are still waiting for the main parties, the mainstream, to follow the change as well. So we have a lot of awareness raising to do there. So I would say that we're sort of like moving in parallel with Sweden, most likely, but the main step is still to come, is still somewhere ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please, Liina.
But the level of awareness is still so low in Sweden and so low in Europe and so low in the world that people, the voters, they don't know to what extent we are in a crisis now, not something further down the line, not something that maybe we in the rich part of the world could protect our children from, and we are ready to sacrifice someone else's children, which is bad as it is. Some people might have grasped that it could be something in the future or for someone else. But the last weeks we have seen now that no one is safe, nowhere is safe. The crisis is here. It's also in Europe. And the gap between the situation we're in and what is considerable something that you would like to vote for is too big. What I'm trying to explain is, if you don't feel that you are in a crisis and a politician says that everything is okay, we can go from fossil fuels to biofuels, just continue, then you will not revolt against it. But if you know all this, everything that we just talked about, this going out of the fire into the frying pan, from one carbon to another, then you would not be okay with the policy that is in place. But so many people are just struggling with their own life, with their own day-to-day life, and you have a few hours in front of the TV or in front of your screen after work and before feeding the kids and then going to bed, and you just get this enormous amount of information, and then someone tells you this is green and fossil free. Okay, good, because I have kids that I'm worried about. I'm just trying to make them eat a little bit more vegetables. I don't know, maybe I'm just putting wrong words in someone else's mouth. But again, we have the attention span from people and from voters are thinking, the fake news are spreading. There are more stuff to care about when it comes to equality, not only the climate crisis, even though it's the same topic. People don't even know that. They don't think of the climate crisis as a human rights issue. So I think it's hard and stressful to be a citizen today. I think it's even harder to have kids and to know what's right. And if you want to know what's right, and if you want to do your best, and some politicians are better than the right-wing parties and talk about something that is greener and fossil free within one generation. If you're not in depth into this issue, of course greenwashing works. And that is so dangerous. Greenwashing works. That's why so many politicians and companies get away with it. Yeah, now I was all over the place. Maybe I was too emotional, but
it's okay. I really feel that this subject has to be also emotional, because we need to know the numbers, but in the end, people make decisions also based on feelings somehow, and they have to somehow be put together. Anyways, last question. What was missing? What did you not have chance to say out? Maybe Liina from Estonia, you start?
Well, I would just like to add something about the emotions. When people become activists, at least in the case of our NGO, then first we have become activists based on emotions. We have all lost forests, which have been very dear to us, and only then have we looked at statistics and facts and data. In my case, it was not so that I read some kind of a newspaper article criticizing the Estonian present forestry policy, and then I decided, oh yes, that's right. Now this has to finish. Now I will become activist. So I think the key is that people really experience something, that they are emotionally involved. Although sometimes emotions are also sort of demonized, that at least in Estonia, in media, sometimes it said that, oh yeah, you're too emotional. All the activists are too emotional. Yeah, that female politician, she's just too emotional about all kind of stuff. So, but still, although emotions are partly used against us in communication, we shouldn't be afraid of them, and we should do our communication and awareness raising so that people get emotionally involved, and it goes also for politicians, of course, and then I think we will get the big shift we need. So.
I couldn't agree more. And it's always hard. I was going into this issue on a total different angle, but I would still agree with you to 100%. Like, how do we explain forest loss in a way for people to start thinking with their gut and then say, I don't need the numbers. I'm just not okay with this. Enough is enough. Enough with the burning. Let's shift towards truly renewable energy and start restoring land and nature that we all depend on, and start saving lives instead of putting life up for grabs in order to just continue short-term profit. And I also want to emphasize that when our opponent talk about us as individuals, mentioning gender, mentioning tone or clothing or emotions, that's when we're winning. Because when they cannot no longer stick to the subject, they have running out of arguments, and then it's just time to level up.
Thank you. Thank you. Great show, really very interesting. Thank you for joining me and giving all that overview. Thank you everyone who was listening, and I really do hope that we will not lose all the natural forests, and that as a society we will understand that we really can't plant forests, but we can plant trees. And if we can make that shift, it is quite different, probably, the decisions we will make. And of course, all the data we are collecting or organizations are collecting, it is all really important. So hopefully it will get better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.